Alright, so for this presentation, I'm going to be talking about climate change and human modification in the Philippines. I've been a little bit sick, so sorry if I sound kind of raspy. So for the first thing I want to talk about is climate change, how it's impacting the ocean and the Philippines. As you can see on the map here, the Philippines is, as we know, a small group of pretty small islands, so that's why the ocean is so important to them. Not only does most of their food come from it, but they're surrounded by water. They're very susceptible to storms and whatnot. Um, as we talked about in previous presentations, pretty much all or most of the food that is collected around the Philippines comes from the ocean. They import, export a lot of, or not import, they just export most of this food. They use it for feeding themselves, so it's really important to their economy. So the health of the ocean is super important. And warming and acidification is contributing to the loss of coral reefs. Uh, so the Philippines is one of the corners of the Coral Triangle, which is one of the most biodiverse coral regions in the world. And just like what's happening to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, is the bleaching of the coral. So most of it's dying, and with that, it's impacting the biodiversity of the area, and it's preventing the survival of a lot of the species that rely on these coral reefs. So, from the smallest fish to the whales, porpoises, tuna, they're all being impacted by this, and therefore so is the Philippines. Um, and then not only are these reefs important for food purposes, but they're also a buffer zone for typhoons. Mangrove swamps are as well, so these areas are shallow, protruding areas in the ocean around most land masses. So therefore, typhoons that hit usually, especially the big waves, they're usually kind of mitigated by these areas. Um, and I found out that half of the 10 most deadly typhoons have actually occurred since 2006. So as we know, climate change is causing an exponential graph of problems, from coral bleaching to um, ocean storms, typhoons, even sea level rise. So we can only expect this to get worse, and a lot of these impacts are being seen in Florida and the southern United States as well. So without coral reefs, both the aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity of the area will decrease. Um, Typhoons can damage not only weak buffer zones, but they actually displace animals as well. While this is actually kind of beneficial, it's also potentially harmful. Um, a lot of these island regions were actually made biodiverse by typhoons. A lot of animals are picked up and moved onto certain islands, and then they begin to evolve there. But at the same time, habitat fragmentation means that a lot of these species are already delicate and their populations are already too small, so a lot of these storms can end up damaging them. Um, so, one of the ways that we're mitigating this is the Filipino government is helping to restore a lot of these areas. Not only are they, supplying locals with the resources to replant a lot of these mangrove forests, but um, they're making new laws that prevent people from overharvesting coral reefs to give them the best chance of recovery possible. Um, so they're doing their best to protect themselves from a lot of these issues with climate change. And then some of the social ecological systems that are important for the Philippines are their agriculture. Um, this is also a impact in China. So a lot of the agriculture in the Philippines is like rice and sugarcane, certain fruits. So these areas are super large and swampy. So it actually helps provide other species with a place to live and a resource for food and whatnot. A lot of these swamps have minnows and small insects and things that egrets and other birds can feed on. So there's kind of a relationship there. Um, Human modification is common in the Philippines because such a large population in a small area of islands can definitely have its influence on the landscape. So as you can see, these rice paddies on the right are taking up quite a lot of space. Um, but with that comes like pollution and whatnot, so they're working on that too. Um, Historically, roads, infrastructure, and even railways have cut into natural areas, and much of the forests are also cleared for fuel purposes. Because the Philippines has so many rural islands and whatnot, a lot of their fuel and heat comes from fires, so firewood is kind of an issue. Um, then they disrupt the environment by fragmenting the landscape and polluting habitats. So, people have an issue with reducing their garbage on mainland areas. So the Philippines has an especially large issue with it because they're just islands. It's kind of hard to control the waste removal and control. So pollution is definitely a big issue here. And then with that, there is habitat fragmentation as well. Conservation can still occur in modified landscapes, though, especially in these areas. I feel like areas that are more tropical have a better chance for this because the animals can be very adaptive to certain situations. One of the things that Southeast Asia and the Philippines are working on right now are wildlife corridors, and then leaving areas of little disturbance so that these populations of animals can continue to thrive and flourish, and then as well as get around to other fragments. A lot of animals in these areas, like monkeys and elephants, not elephants, monkeys, elephants, reptiles, they can survive very well next to human populations, but we definitely need to provide them with some support there. And then considerations, finally, for human life are important in the Philippines because so many people there rely directly on the ecosystem for their livelihood. They rely on it for food, they rely on it for their economic growth. Tuna is another great example of this. Not only do they fish to support themselves, but they also export a lot of tuna around the world. So, it's in their best interest to not only care for the environment, but to make sure the people are being taken care of as well. That's why policies and lawmaking is so delicate here because, you got to keep the people happy and then also support wildlife there as well.